What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now on Cannabis, and if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. We have a great show for you today. We have Michigan Matt. He's joining us from Michigan to talk all about fertigation and water. And we're also just going to be catching up with Matt. If you're not familiar with Matt, he's a grower out in Michigan and the recreational legal market. And so it's always interesting to catch up with him and hear what's going on in the industry and what's going on, on actual boots on the ground, so to speak. So I'm super stoked about that. But before we get too far into it, I have a few shout outs that I need to make. First off, shout out to our friends on Cannabis. We have a live stream every show that we do these interviews with, and so folks can join us in the live stream. We do giveaways every month, give away things like this Lost Coast plant hair therapy hat and shirts and all sorts of things. I've got a whole box behind me full of stuff that we give away all the time. So if you want to be a part of those giveaways or get a chance to take part, join us at cannabis.app or in the search Cannabis in the App Store, and use code GROWERSLOVE for 50% off your first month. Your support is super appreciated. Also, we have we have like 4 different sponsors now. So you'll see now below me, I just added a rotating banner of the different sponsors. So shout out to Neptune Seedbank.com. They're the biggest seed bank in the US. We really appreciate their support. They're going to have a bunch of great breeders. We've interviewed some of them on our show already. So if you're looking for genetics, make sure to go to NeptuneSeedbank.com. Sacred3Mushrooms.com. If you're looking for a home grow kit, a fungi home grow kit, you can get one on there for as low as $80, it looks like. And they've got, you can, once you run it, you can get refill of supplies. So definitely check out them at sacred3mushrooms.com. And then, of course, our friend at TikiSeeds.com and TikiCuts.com. What's up with TikiMadMan?
Tiki's doing a galactic grapefruit and 50% off the site. So you buy a pack of you buy a pack of stickers and you get a pack of seeds. And so hit up Tiki at TikiSeeds.com. And then also a shout out to Neptune. He's got some raw genetics that just went out, some Z foam, which is a Z pie by Soap. And you can pick that one up at NeptuneSeedbank.com.
Awesome. And then also shout out to Dirk and our friends over at Lost Coast Plant Therapy. We really appreciate their support. Really appreciate it. All right, let's get into the intro, get into the show. Like I said, we've got Michigan Matt back. This is the 3rd time that we've had him on the show. So if you like what we talk about today, make sure to come search on our channel for our other interviews. But today, Michigan's joining us Michigan, the whole state of Michigan. Michigan Matt is joining us to talk about water strategies for home and commercial users. So welcome back to the show, Matt.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. It's exciting to see your sponsorship growing. It's good to see.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, you were there day one, brother. And I really appreciate your candidness and your willingness to share at every level. And so we really are happy to have folks like you as friends of the show. And we're glad to have you on. So let's go ahead and catch us up with what's been going on in the world of Faded. What have you guys been up to? Are you getting your product on the shelf and working on your branding?
So we are getting dialed in the grow. Everything is finally kind of coming together. The crew is really kind of clicking on all cylinders. We're able to produce at a high level and work as minimal amount of hours as possible. So everybody seems to be pretty happy with that. And we keep things kind of small and tight knit. We have a very small little crew with me plus 3. So kind of makes things nice. But as far as branding, that is going to be a 2024 goal. We're really looking to push Faded hard come 2024. We're finding out that we have a lot of demand for our product at this point, and to the point where we're seeing the wholesale market kind of on the state side dip down between 800 and 900 being in this kind of outdoor season. But we're able to maintain our price between 12 and 14. So it's kind of telling us that people want our product and are willing to pay for our product. So it's kind of time to start putting more exotic strains into packaging, something like Cherry Paloma, and get that out of the mass.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
How do you get the word out these days? Like, because it seems like it's tough times right now. There's at least out here in California, I just saw a headline actually about Oregon talking about there's a surplus of weed right now, so to speak. So, anyways, it's a tough market. So, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what does that mean when you're talking about kind of building the brand and getting the name out there? What's that look like right now?
A year ago, if you asked me this question, I would just tell you how bad we're struggling and trying to just make a sale. But over the course of the last years, we're a year in harvest now. Our products is proven to kind of sell itself. The customers keep coming back for it. So we have one of the higher turnover rates on the shelf. So maintaining that quality product is able to help us sustain during the surplus. I think the whole nation sees surpluses this time of year, just from casualties of outdoor growing and most seasons only allowing for one harvest. And that's kind of, dried and cured and ready for market now. So it's got to be consumed before the market kind of levels out again.
And friends are sharing with friends. I might not have to go to the dispo for a couple months because my buddy over down the street just grew a whole bunch of weed in his backyard. You know what I mean?
I hate to say it though. I am witnessing and what I'm seeing is a lot less of the home grow. There's a lot less of that going on than what there used to be. We're seeing a lot of grow stores still shutting down and not able to, like the mom and pops, not being able to sustain. And I think that's also a casualty of the dispensaries and being able to go in and buying a $60 ounce when why would I want to spend $100 from my neighbor? So, it does make things a little bit more challenging, but the white market is still hot. It's still doing its thing.
I'll throw in my last question here on this point, but kind of timely is your speaking of neighbors, Ohio just went legal, at least in some aspects of legal, recreational. I'm from Ohio, so I had a friend post today that she went to a store in my town and bought some weed, which is kind of cool. So how do you think that will kind of impact you guys in Michigan? Because I always heard from everyone in Ohio that they just went up to Michigan to buy
weed. I'm happy for the people of Ohio to have legalization, but I'm also kind of in a paradox where I'm seeing this kind of play out in the Michigan market too, and watching some of our consumer base kind of leave. But again, like if you're producing a product that somebody wants to come back for, I think they'll cross the border for it if they want it.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, there are folks here that still have a clientele list because they put out a product that their clients want. And that being said, you have one of the particular jobs, I'm assuming, of picking varieties and making sure you find the bangers that work, but also work on the shelf. That has to be a hard task because there's a lot of boutique stuff that's amazing, but doesn't make sense in a commercial setting. So can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have to prepare for a couple times a year, right? We have to prepare for the surplus time of the year, and we have to prepare for the non-surplus time of the year. And to do that, we as a commercial cultivation have to understand our consumer base. And our base of dispensary buyers or provisioning center owners, whoever, they don't want to only just buy exotics at top end pricing. So they want to buy some of the cheaper stuff too. So if you have a mom and pop dispensary that only wants to buy 1 pound per strain, then it's important to give them a variety that they can afford. So tying that back into strains, I can't remember if I touched on this last time we were together, but what we try to do is we're in the process of like ranking our strains and creating like a scaling system that encompasses like 4 categories. THC percentage, which is important for the consumer. Unfortunately, it just is what it is.
It is what it is.
Weight per light. So 3 a light would be a high consumer or a high would score high in this field. Labor input, as far as the grow is concerned, as far as pruning, is it a small plant? Does it stretch much? Is it easy to prune through? Does it have a tight internodal spacing? Does it need an extra D leaf like a white truffle or a mandarin butter, something like that? On the fresh coast side, might see some of these bigger kind of leaves that need to be stripped again. And with these factors are taken apart into contribution with trimming and how fast a trimmer can get through and trim the product too. So we're kind of balancing all these and trying to decide on a cycle to cycle basis, like what are 3 or 4 high testing or high range of our scale products that we can run, but also a couple of lower range. That might be a lower THC percentage that somebody can afford better, like a 24% versus a 30+%. It might be something that is super easy to trim, or something that my crew is like really loves running, because when we do a prune on it, we can fly through a table in like half a day. So we take all these things into consideration, and we have to tie it in with what time of year the market is. So if it's the summer, then it doesn't matter as much, because we have a little bit higher demand. The people will still buy a lot of the 30%ers all at once. But this time of year, I have to mix it up, where like maybe I have 2 or 3 strains that are 30+%ers, and then the rest are like kind of the more mid to average for people to be able to afford.
And I imagine you also have to cater to a terpene profile and have variety in that as well. You can't just be jamming orange down their throat,
No, there's no doubt. Yeah, we're constantly trying to change up and have multiple different varieties. Like I always loved the gas leaners, but that's not just, I'm not just the only person going to the dispensaries and buying this product, right? I have to prepare for the entirety of the consumer. So we'll bring in some like the frozen grapes or the Mandarin butters or the cherry palomas, just to give a variety of flavors throughout, and then we can decide what is working really well for us and really focus. Like I keep bringing it up, but cherry paloma is a very good producer for us, so we continually run that as one of our higher end strains, and it has a flavor unlike a lot of the other strains, and it has a look unlike a lot of the other strains, so it makes it a lot easier for us to run.
Blessings, brother. So before we move on, let's go ahead and give a shout out to that faded crew before we start talking water.
So we have Avery, Herman, or maybe I should leave last names out. We have Avery, Little Maeve, or Little Mama Ave on Instagram. Then we have Devin Johns and Jason Robertson. So these guys, like, we all work a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. We do our best to get done as soon as possible. We take an hour lunch every day and hang out together and do our thing. We're the type of crew that, we go in and have a good day together. There's no animosity, there's no fighting, there's no stress. We're there to accomplish the goals of the day and get out. And if we can accomplish it by 3 o'clock and get out, then we will. If we can accomplish everything by Thursday, then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we're working very easy days. So we do the best that we can with the tools and resources that we have.
Nice.
Well, let's kick off into our subject of water. So kind of talk us, or to get us started, talk to us about the significance of water quality. Why should, viewers here be thinking about water quality for an indoor grow?
So this is one that I kind of thought about a little bit today as I kind of read through the format, and it's important. Or I think most growers know, or maybe the newer ones don't as well, but cannabis is a dynamic accumulator. So it will pick up pretty much anything that you give it, and it's going to absorb it and put it within the flower, which is later on going to be smoked. So it being a dynamic accumulator, we have to watch out what's in our water, because the plant's going to eat it. It's going to absorb it. It's going to use it. So for instance, just because where we are, the lead issue, that's always a very important reason to be monitoring your water and to be watching your water. Lead obviously can be absorbed by the plant, and that is not something that we want to smoke. There's obviously other things throughout the water, and we're going to get into a little bit deeper too, but it's important to know your water source, and if you're uncomfortable drinking it, then I wouldn't feed it to your flower.
Right.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that kind of show up in a water test in your area besides lead that people might be?
Like city water, right? City water is synonymous to having the chlorine or I think chloramine and chlorine, whatever, or both of the other within the water. And that's not necessarily something that we want to be feeding to our plants. So if we can run a filter to at least pull those out of the water, then it's important to do that. And again, if you're a city liver, if you live in the city, the municipalities typically have water tests available for you for free that you can look up either online or go to the municipality and ask for, and you can get at least get an understanding of what levels are within the water. I do know some people within the city that even in the state license side that are just run straight from the tap because they have good clean water. They're reliable sources, but they see swings in their pH. They'll see swings in some other things throughout the year that they have to, kind of have to be prepared for because there's times throughout the year where the city might add more chlorine to the water. They might add more things to the water just to kind of keep the levels where they need to be. But again, so like I had a grow in the middle of a country once, like it was way out in the middle of nowhere, and it was testing like if the water out of the tap was coming out at like about a 1 EC. So, like that doesn't give you a lot of room. Like we'll get into RO and in that strategy here in a minute, but it doesn't give you a lot of room to play with when you're trying to mix up a feed maybe to feed your plants too.
Yeah, and I'll also just mention too, like. It sounds like a no duh thing that I'm about to say, but your water is going to vary based on where you live. So like, I've had to move around in kind of a big metropolitan area, but each place I've lived in has had water from different sources, right? So like one place I lived, the water was totally great to drink out of the faucet. And then the next place I lived, even though it was, across town, so to speak, or whatever, it's from a different source. And just totally different. So keep track of all these things. We're going to be talking about pH in a minute too. So that's another
just
one.
Just to kind of build off that, not only is it the location that you're in, but it's the time of year that you are too, because the groundwater changes throughout the year. So whether that be temperature or and whatnot, but things will change throughout the year. So it's important to keep a monitor on your baseline the whole way.
Right. For us, for over here, it's rain cycles. The rain cycles when the wet season comes in. And all of our reservoirs get inundated with a bunch of muddy water. They got to do extra shits to it.
Oh, interesting. Well, speaking of treating water, can you fill us in, Matt, on what reverse osmosis is, and if that's something that is always necessary? Like, yeah, I would love for your kind of tips on how people should think about RO water.
So RO water is reverse osmosis water. It's obviously heavily filtered water through membranes and carbon filters that gets your water to a point where it's near or at 0 EC parts per million, however you want to measure it. RO water it has its necessary functions, but it also it can be extremely wasteful. So you have to have like this strict balance between how you're running it and like if you have a water bill or if you really care about water waste and that type of stuff. You have something else throughout there too. I kind of missed one of the parts.
I guess I was curious, like, what do you think? When is that RO best suited? Like, who's it best suited for? When, because I know, for viewers of the Dude Grows show, they've always talked about RO, and I guess I've struggled to understand like who's the best use case for RO, and then maybe for other people they don't maybe need something as hardcore as RO.
So here's where I've always kind of stood with RO is like I've always loved RO water because it comes with a 0 base. So I can think of it like a painter with a blank canvas. I have absolutely nothing to start in there. I get to put whatever I want within that water to feed my plants. But I am a bottle grower. I'm a nutrient bottle grower. I don't have organics. I don't run anything that is time release within my media. So I constantly rely on what I'm putting together. I'm very picky and stringent on what is in my water. So if I can start personally with a 0 slate, then I typically try to, and then build from there. I'm not saying that that's what we do now. We still we have there's some more higher end ROs that allow you to kind of dial in what your EC is kind of coming out. And like we'll do ours at like run on average about a 0.2 EC. So about 100 parts per million to 500 scale. And that's like our starting base. And that helps us reduce the amount of waste that we're coming out of. But like state growers, guys that are being tested heavily, like that is maybe one of the more important things to be focused on, making sure that you're like I said earlier, like I do know state growers within a city that do grow without it and still pass their testing, but there's a lot of paranoia with testing. There's a lot of stuff that people get anxious about. And if I can eliminate what I can, any variables that I can to fail a test, then I'm going to. RO water, might not be extremely necessary for the home grower. If you have a good tap water, if you have a good water source, there's
what about those inline charcoal filters? I use that. They say they strip out chlorine and chloramine, but at the end of the day, how effective are those really?
Oh, I think they're extremely effective. Anything that's going to eliminate anything out of the water that's going to be harmful to feed to the plants is important to consider within the grow. I think like the big boy, the small boy, like those types of filters, they're not like pure RO water where you're getting like a 2-to-1 waste to feed to good ratio. Which some of the ROs have become more efficient than that over the years. But it's a good question on like kind of who would be using it. Nobody necessarily does need it if they are in a trusted water source and can trust with their feeding of their plants. But kind of like what I touched on earlier with the blank canvas, if I'm starting with a 1 EC at 500 parts per million, and I want to feed at an average of 2 to 2.5 EC starting at 0, then either I'm going to be raising my EC being fed to my plants, or I'm going to be cutting back on nutrients that are going to be fed to my plants that I know what those nutrients are versus what could be in the water. Unless, again, you're getting it tested and you have reliable sources.
That's crazy. And that's amazing because I know like a lot of my family lives down in the Tucson, Arizona area, and before they really had filtered water, they would get like buildups literally on their teeth.
I was just in Phoenix. Yeah, I was just in Phoenix for Thanksgiving, and they were like, "We're not drinking Arizona water. They have their own filtered water company that comes in and changes out their water every whatever." But there's a part, a side of the country that I was, or a part of the state that I was in that, well, the water came out of 1 EC. Like that's chewable. Like it's not good. It's orange immediately. Everything turns orange, and there's stuff in there that I'm just not going to want to feed to my plants. Like, and especially me, I'm a really piggy smoker. Like, especially if I'm growing it and I see it grow and I know what's been the inputs that are going into it, and I know something went wrong, then I'm probably, like, as weird as whatever, call me whatever, but I'm not going to probably smoke that one. Where like if I know everything's clean going into it, everything looks good, then that's probably something I'm going to lean to smoke, and that's why it makes it hard for me to smoke other people's flower too.
So let's kind of move on to pH and how that affects the way your roots uptake anything.
So there's a scale that you can look up online. It's a pH scale. It's a nutrient absorption scale. It's a very useful tool that I would highly recommend to any grower to at least look at, peek at, and check out. Certain medias want, or I don't want to say want or require. Certain medias have different ranges of pH that can be fed in at. For instance, I grew in Rockwell for 8 years, and I think I came in between 6 and 6.2 at most times, where now I'm in cocoa and I tend to stay around 5.9. And then again, if you look at the availability chart at pH ranges, that's going to give you that 5.9 to 6.0 range is going to give you the most available pH the best pH to have the macro micronutrients best absorbed in the most range, or in the biggest range. That was really kind of hard to say.
This pH topic, again, back to like water sources. When I first started growing, I grew in a spot where I didn't really have to worry as much about pH of my water. And then in the house that we later, bought, and the one that we live in now, my water often comes out at like 8 pH. And so I struggled sometimes when I was growing with that. So I'll call out that your pHs can range a lot. And so I just want, viewers to keep that in mind.
Let me expand on that too. If you're using microbes, pH is not nearly as important. If you're using anything organic or organic based, because those microbes that are within the media are pH buffers in themselves. So if you're feeding it at like a 6.4, they're going to buffer the pH to where it needs to be fed the plant. But if you're a Rockwell grower, or you're a grower that does not rely on any type of microbe to help you grow, then pH becomes a lot more important.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think I want to also let that be said that just because you're using microbes doesn't mean you can get crazy with it. I think some people throw out the terms, oh, you use microbes, you don't need a pH. Well, it depends on what you're putting in. I mean, if you're feeding it straight lemonade, you should probably pH that before you put it in, you know?
Yeah, there's no doubt. And then again, are you a nutrient grower? Are you feeding always straight water because you're an organic grower or a no-till grower? Because that is going to make a difference too. Most good, I don't want to say most because I don't have experience with most, but a lot of the more reliable nutrient companies will mix in within a safe pH range.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at my recipe, my feed chart, it's 6.2, 6.3 every time I water in with my municipality is very stable with its pH, and I can almost guarantee what my pH is going to be every time I mix in my
Mine
recipe.
is not. Mine is not at all. So I have to make sure that I'm starting with a blank slate as much as possible, and then just kind of buffering from there.
Yeah.
And then it depends too what nutrients are you using, because if you're using a monosilicic acid, although they're all labeled as potassium silicates now, but you're using the ones that are like 3 mils every 5 gallons, like the real thick stuff, that typically will bring your pH way down if you're using that along with other things and not checking. When I mix my nooch up, typically when I'm not using it, it mixes up in a pretty safe range of between like 5.6 to 6.4, depending on what I'm using and what type of cycle I'm in. But if I'm using silica, I'm looking at like a 4.2 to 4.8. So that, like, I do not want to feed that to my plants. That's the dangerous range. I want to get that up to a safe range.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about oxygenating water. So how important is that? When should people be thinking about that? I haven't really thought about that, but I'm mostly like messing with watering cans. But I imagine if I'm oxygenating water, it's larger volumes of water.
There's a very particular science to this that I'm not like extremely up on, but there is there is merit to having highly oxidized water fed to your plants. I did it a lot in the beginning days of my grow because I didn't really know what I was doing, but now I don't typically add oxygen back to the water. I rely on proper drybacks to get the oxygen to the roots the way that it needs to be. I think we're about to get into it, but water temperature is something that I would be focusing way harder on than the amount of dissolved solids within the water.
Because the temperature is kind of what makes it available, right? If you're at a higher temperature, your oxygen availability and your oxygen presence is low, right?
That's correct. Higher or lower temperature out of the range of 68 to 72. 68, I believe, is the most optimal with the most oxygen within the water to be delivered to the plants. But it's also a level that the plants are comfortable with being fed. I have firsthand seen the damages that cooler temperature water can do to the plants. We saw yields almost cut in half with water temperatures between 58 to 62, just like running throughout the winter before we had proper heating and things that could stabilize the water to the time we needed it. So we learned real quick on how important that cool temperature was versus the proper temperature. And then on the reverse side of that, the warm temperatures are going to be more susceptible to molds, mildews, and bacteria and things to be populating versus like what a cold would or what, again, proper temperature ranges would be.
That's why I would like to shout out the Blue Lab pins. They tell you the water temperature along with your pH as well. And, it's worth it. It's good to know because seasonally, your temperatures can change a lot with what's coming out.
Big time. Yeah. Like for us in the middle of the winter, I know it's like kind of mild in Michigan right now, but once we get into those January, February months where it's 0 to 12 degrees outside, that water temperature is going to start coming in at 56 degrees. I need to do something to stabilize that and bring that back up to 68, whether that's pool bucket heaters or we have like a dedicated hot water heater to our RO. And that's another thing. So
nice.
if you're using an RO and you have this cold temperature coming in too, that RO is not going to work nearly as efficient. It runs way slower and it does not fill tanks as fast as what it is rated to do. When you're bringing it in at the 68 to 72 level, that's the most optimal range for the RO to produce the most amount of water.
Pro tip.
There you go. And trust me, like we were battling water last year. We were our water wasn't filling as fast because we had these cold temperatures. We didn't have it was a struggle on a day-to-day basis to hope that we had enough water for the day.
Well, speaking of kind of water conservation, do you have any tips for folks that how they could kind of recycle or reuse water?
So like as far as like runoff, like and that type of stuff, like stuff that it has a very higher EC, and that definitely is something that requires a little bit more expensive sophistication, something that's going to really reclaim the water and refilter it back into zero. For a home grower, I don't know how smart that would be or efficient that would be on a grow scale with somebody with a water bill that is obviously going to be a lot smarter. It's going to probably pay for itself down the road. Reclamation is important, and you can use it in different ways. There's been in like, I don't highly recommend doing this, but you can use your wastewater for your humidifiers. The only issue with that is like you'll see high calcium buildup on like your fans and on equipment and things like that. Using filtered water in your humidifiers it's a lot cleaner. So there's ways. I'm trying to think of what else you can use your dehumidifier water, put that back into your humidifier.
I've seen people plumb all of their quests into a tank and then treat that tank and then reuse that dehu water as a way to lower their water footprint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Itself is like a RO water in that it should be pretty much nothing, right?
Well, yeah, it's because it's filled. It's like distilled water. Distilled water is RO water. It's the same thing. So you should be getting back to like basically a zero. But there's other dirt and shit contaminants that it can be picked up during that period. And that's why it's still like while they will still refilter that before they do reuse it. Or you could use that dehu water and just put it right back in your humidifier. Because there's times in my cycle where I have humidifier going for 15 minutes, then my dehus kick on for 3 minutes, and then my humidifiers kick back on 10 minutes after that. Like they're constantly battling each other, but
yeah,
it's to maintain that constant in that as baseline environment as possible. So you could use the reclaim off of each other to kind of filter and use each other. But again, like if it's not extremely filtered, then you can eventually that humidity will create calcium buildups on some of the equipment and some other stuff you'll see.
That's cool because I run a humidifier in my bedroom and I run a dehumidifier in my flower room. And my dehumidifier in the flower room has a pump. I could just run that pump line right into the bedroom, right into the humidifier, and put the water right in it. And I'm not constantly filling it 24. That's brilliant. Another pro tip.
Helps.
That's great. So I think the last question on this is a commercial facility redundancy. You talked about having water problems. What are your strategies for that, and what can folks do for some kind of redundancy in those situations?
So fortunately for us, we have 1,200 gallons on standby at all times. Well, not at all times. Once we kind of fill our reses for the day, then it refills overnight. But 1,200 is like 3 times the amount that we need in a daily basis. So that way I have 3 days at least in front of me. One other thing that we do or other growers might do is fill their res before they like their feed res before they leave for the day. So that way their backup res has the water all filled up in it. And also their feed res has water in it. So you kind of have double filled right there. But for us, like there's water stores, right? There's places you can call and get water delivery. It's not cheap, but it's feasible. Distilled water, like I said earlier, like if you're on the home grow scale and you only need a couple gallons, distilled water, you can go to any grocery store and pick up and use that as well.
Makes sense. Excuse me. Well, let's talk about fertigation. First off, for guys like me that aren't really sure what that is, what is fertigation? What does that mean?
It's like the process. It's the process of it's the feeding of your plants, right? It's like most fertigation is like a system, irrigation system that is set up to help fertigate the plants. But I guess I don't know. I'm not a scientist. Maybe fertigation could be still considered with a hand feed because you're still kind of fertigating your plants, but it's not done automated. I don't know if that's. I don't know if automation, it needs to be part of fertigation. Do you guys know?
Isn't that just like injecting fertilizer in water, right?
Yeah, I guess that would
But
be, and
maybe
you
you
could
have
do
to
that
use
by
air.
hand
But don't
still.
you have to use air, like air to inject it? So you'd have to blow on it before you put it in.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Well, we'll have to Google the answer for that one. But for so how is it? How is fertigation used then in commercial cannabis? How are you kind of coming across this?
So, well, let me just like kind of put it in the how do we water our plants, just to make this a little bit simpler, and so I'm not so bound to technicalities with fertigation as the definition. Um, so we like to hand feed our plants in veg. We're a little bit more controlled, and we want to be hands on, feeling out every pot. Veg is where I spend, or I like if. Let me put it this way: if everything is on track and flower and going well, then I'm spending 90% of my time in veg. It's for me the most important area of growth is when they're young. Once they kind of get older and kind of get into their system, it makes things a little bit easier for employees to be able to handle, or people that you can train.
Less
But
steering involved, right? Crop steering involved.
yeah, somewhat. Like there's always crop steering involved, whether you want to believe in the theory or not. There's definitely some tips to, or there's some merit to vegetative and generative feeding cycles. So like in veg, we want to feed a little bit more often with a little bit of higher. So we use like the Rostage F system of 1 through 5 of like figuring out the weights of the plants, right? So 1 would be like you forgot to feed that plant yesterday. You come in, lift that thing up, and like you could throw it across the road because it's so light. And oh my God, the plant's about to die. 5 is like you just watered everything, got to run off, and then you took another gallon of water and put it on top of it to make sure that you're at absolute holding capacity that media could be had. 3 is like that middle ground. In veg, we like to be in that 3 to 3.5 range, where like we let that thing get dried back, but we don't want to go all the way down to like a 2, where it's like into flowering. And that's more like a generative strategy where you have a higher dry back and a little bit more often feedings. What we kind of do is in veg, like we use a tuber from Royal Gold, so it has a little bit higher holding capacity for water. We can feed, like for instance, we transplanted our clones on Friday this past week. We fed at a rate in a 1 gallon of 250 milliliters per plant. And I'm going to have to feed those plants again until Tuesday. Tuesday, and then like we have a pretty set schedule down now with our media and like knowing when to feed every time. And Tuesday we'll feed again between the range of like 250 to 300 mils, and then we're on almost like an every other day or every third day basis, raising the amount of volume that we're feeding to the plants each time, and trying, like for our strategies, we're trying not to hit any runoff throughout veg. Once we get into flower, then we're getting in a little bit more of that generative kind of feeding cycle where you want to see the higher dry back. So you want to get that thing down to like a 2 where you've lifted up and you can comfortably lift that plant up. You can tell maybe there's a little bit of water still in the bottom, but for the most part, the plant needs to be watered. So we're kind of the ranges that we're looking for. And this is something that my employees and I like will go through. And if I'm training them on watering, they have to be with me daily for like a week, start feeling every plant that I'm feeling. And then we kind of go over, what do you think that plant was? This is what I would have said that plant is. Is this time for this plant to be fed? And we take it on a very individual basis throughout flowering too, where there's parts of the room that are a little bit more shaded than other parts of the room that aren't getting as much light to the plant, so it's shaded, and therefore it's not transpiring as much. So those plants might not need to be fed on an everyday basis. So we use strategies to make sure that each plant is handled individually. The system kind of allows us to do that, and then we kind of irrigate from there. So once we have our plants into flowering, once we're about 5 to 7 days in, we'll start hitting a little bit of runoff, reducing the amount of EC that we're feeding each feed, and or at least week to week, we're kind of tapering down and reducing. And yeah, that's kind of where our strategy is at this point.
Great.
That was a lot.
Yeah, sorry, went a little quick there.
No worries. We had I'll let JR take a question, but before we do, I wanted to bring in a question that came in from chat from our live viewer in the cannabis community. It was Mac Buds, and they were asking, what do you do if you overwater and your leaves are yellowing? So I thought that was a good question because you were just talking about how basically there's a trial and error and there's a learning process to watering your plants and also feeding your plants. So yeah, could you talk about maybe what someone could do if they had something like that happen where their leaves were yellowing?
So first of all, you have to figure out if that's an overwatering or underwatering issue because it can show the same symptoms both ways. It's just that there's a little bit a different look to the leaf when you're looking at it. Like if you're a trained eye, you kind of know what an overing water leaf looks like versus what an undering water leaf looks like. You might have more of a curl, a fatter leaf on the overwatering, where it'd be a little more papery thin and kind of more on a more a straight diagonal kind of facing down or angled down, with the plants that need to be watered. So once you kind of figure out which one of those, then you can kind of decide. So if in this the scenario, when I do consulting for some people, the thing that I always tell them is to challenge yourself to not water a plant. Like really challenge yourself to get to the next day and see what it looks like. Or if you're doing this on a big trial and error, or if you're fortunately like somebody that can have a higher plant count, you can put two plants next to each other and feed this one and don't feed this one and see if this one is still good the next day. And that maybe I can wait an extra day on that. Once you're starting to see those types of symptoms, drying that thing back, taking it out of the watering cycle, and making sure that you get to like what would be like a 2 or a 3 in the watering system before you start watering again. Using microbes, using recharge, something like that can also help kind of the plant facilitate and recover if you're seeing some of the yellowing issues. But once
foliar as well.
It depends on where you are in your cycle, right? So you're not going to foliar with. I'd try not to foliar with flower, right? Or if you're in veg, that's definitely something. Or pre-flower, it's definitely a strategy that could work. But if you're into flower, you have to like just let that plant be, let it dry out, get to its regular dry state, and then feed in slowly. Like you can start with like a half feed for that day and just make sure that it's not getting overfed again. So it gets the next day and you kind of feeling out that plant as it goes. So on the converse of that, so if you're underwatering plants and you come into your plants like being really wilted and you need to obviously feed that thing immediately, you don't want to give that thing a full feed off the rip. You're going to drown the plants, you'll drown the roots, you'll drown things that are really dry. So what we do, if we come through, like I said, there's going to be times throughout our cycle where we're not feeding a plant. Well, we might come back the next day and that might not have been that great of a decision because that might be at that 1.5 range or that really light range where we could probably throw that thing across the road if we wanted to. So what we'll do is we'll do a very slight feed to that. We'll do like a quarter shot of what the full feed would be. So if you're feeding a gallon, we might do like a quarter gallon, so like 1,000 milliliters or so. Just to kind of wake up the roots, to wake up the plant and not put it in shock by giving it the rest of that full feed right then. We'll wait about 15 minutes, watch the plant start to recover and start to they have that downward sloping angle leaf kind of turn back up. And once that thing turns back up, then we kind of proceed with the rest of the feed for that plant or that row for that day. Another strategy too is if you are extremely dry, dim your lights, bring your lights down while that plant recovers and brings itself back to life. You don't want to like extra stress it out with more light coming on that thing.
That's a good pro tip too. It really is, because that's added pressure, added stress, that it's trying to allocate resources to other things that it don't really want to deal with at that moment.
Right. So if we're using 1,000 watt HPS and we have this issue come, we'll dim our lights down to like 50-40% and like let them sit there until the plants are recovered to the point where we are like, okay, that's an upward facing angled leaf or however you want to describe it. That looks like a praying plant. Everything looks better. Let's bring the lights back on. Another thought too is if you're going on vacation or can't feed that day, or you get some prior engagements or something like that as a home grower, you can dim your lights down and that's going to slow transpiration too.
Yeah, and all the heat coming off the medium and all that kind of good stuff. Another thought I had about that is reading your plants. Like when you come in and the veg lights turn on for your veg, just for you in your veg room, at what time do you really notice that they've kind of come to life and they're really transpiring? Or, when do you like to read your plants before you know?
It was strain dependent, man, because Cherry Paloma, she is grumpy in the morning. She is so grumpy in the morning. Like stays down, even if she's saturated, like she doesn't want to wake up. Like it's just really grumpy. It's kind of funny to watch. Where there's other plants like wait when the lights flip on, or just before they know the lights are flipping on, so they're already praying and ready to go. So like it's very strain dependent. It's watching your plants. It's really like it's not a lot of time, but I got like 14 years of cultivation underneath my belt now, where I've been staring at plants for 14 plus years. And like, I have a pretty good eye on knowing what a stressed out plant looks like, what a non-stressed out plant looks like, and likely what the variable was that causes the stress or the non-stress. So really just like to get that kind of training on yourself is like just be like staring at your plants. What do they look like today? What do the leaf serrations look like? That's another thing that's really kind of goes unnoticed is being able to like separate your strains just by look. Like each strain, like you might have a GMO plant that's crossed with something else, and it might have characteristics of the GMO plant, but each strain has its own unique visuals to them that can help you sort them out, whether it's like the amount of serrations down the single amount of leaf, or the style of the serrations, or the size of them, the veins, how veiny in between each of the leaves are. Like there's a lot of different things that you can kind of look at and learn your plants.
Yeah. I would say that's one of the fun things as a grower, when you're growing a bunch of strains, when you start to pick up that kind of stuff. I feel like I have fun when I'm like, because like this past summer I had a bunch of different strains growing in my backyard, and it was fun when you start to pick out like, oh yeah, that one has this thing, and you just kind of pick up all these different characteristics or things.
I don't mean to toot my own horn, but toot. So we had a cycle a couple years ago for my last employer that was 2 strains of strawberry guava that we were running, and we were doing 150 plants, and we had 100 of number 1 pheno and 100 of number 2 pheno, let's just call it, or 50 of number 2 pheno, and they all got mixed together. And I went in there in veg, and I picked them out 100% correct. Like
wow,
just by staring at the leaves for a little while, learning the leaf, and there was the same strain. It was just different phenotypes of it.
Yeah.
And just staring at the serrations and like looking at the growth patterns. And I was able to be 100% successful on dividing them out. I was kind of
I'll toot my own horn and tell you how terrible I am. I had the Jokers come in, and I had it with my Cherry Paloma. And I fucking tell you, man, those things look so similar. I got labeling mixed up out of the cloner, and I couldn't honestly tell the ones apart. It just kept fucking me over and over. I thought for sure I knew my Cherry Paloma, and I got to tell you, Matt, man, it was like 3 cycles of hell. But thanks to I'll shout out Rasufa's name till I die. Thanks to Rasufa, he sent me it back, and she's back in the fold and in the flower room.
Nice. But yeah, labeling, the stresses of the labeling of your plants, like that is very underrated and very important.
Yes.
Make sure you have a good system in place. Make sure if you have somebody else doing it that they're reliable, trustworthy, and you put out very black and white terms out of how to do it.
Oh, Jesus. But that's good information. So let's move on to electroconductivity. We talked a little bit all throughout the interview about EC, but can you kind of explain what it is and its impact on the way you're able? Well, you kind of mentioned how you're able to feed and how it impacts your feeding, but just kind of give us a little overview of it, if you could.
Well, obviously, EC parts per million, same thing. It's just dependent on the EC number times the parts per million value, because there's 2 different types of values. So that's how we're looking at EC. EC is the measurement of the amount of electrode conductivity throughout your water, which is basically like your nutrient content or non-nutrient content if you're looking at unfiltered water. For us, like So EC for us, we obviously pay attention to it throughout the majority of the cycle, and we're feeding our highest EC in the beginning of the plant life and the lowest EC at the end of the plant life, and we're tapering down kind of throughout. We're looking at, like, we try to shoot for about a 2.5 to 2.6 EC in veg from the day that the clone hits the 1 gallon all the way into day one of flower. So we're sitting at that 2.5 to 2.6, not hitting any runoff. We're running about a 14-day veg in a 1 gallon and a 14-day veg in a 3 gallon. So about a roughly 28 to 30-day cycle. When we flip into flower, that first week of flower, we're already reducing our EC number from 2.5 to 2.6 to about 2.0 to 2.1. And then about day 5, 6, 7, somewhere in there, we're going to start hitting our first amount of runoff. It's important to kind of track your runoff. It's not like runoff numbers aren't extremely important as far as like what is coming out, but it's important to know what's coming out in case you have an issue. It just allows you to be able to kind of eliminate a variable. You have a 6.8 EC coming out and 6.8 pH and a 2.9 EC coming out, then you're probably, if you're having an issue, it might not be that. But it also allows you to track, like for us, we're not hitting any runoff early on in veg. So we kind of want to know what those numbers are looking like, so we know how much to taper off at certain times. So if we're like in that 2.1 range now, where we're starting to hit runoff and we're seeing like a 3.5 EC or something like extremely high, like 4.0, then our next feed might go down to like a 1.5 feed, just for that one feed to help kind of reduce that number and get it closer to the number that we're coming in at, like that 2.1. Second, third week of flower, we're starting to reduce that number again. We get down to about a 1.7 to 1.9, I'd say, somewhere in that range, depending on where we're at. Day 18, I like to do a small, what I consider a flush. Like, I don't want to call it a flush, but what I consider a flush in this circumstance is a lower EC feed to kind of help release that higher EC volume within the media. So if we're at like a 1.7 EC feed at day 18, I like to come in at like a 1.0 just for the day, because we're seeing like we're likely seeing our runoff number at that point being at like 2.5 to 2.8. So now we want to kind of reduce that number a little bit more as best as possible and see if we can get that thing down to like closer to like a 2.0 or closer to our like 1.7 range that we're typically coming in at. By the time we're like day 24, 25, somewhere in that range, we're reducing our base again. We're getting our EC down to 1.5 at this range. 1.4 to 1.5, and we kind of stick at this number almost like day 40. So what's going to happen is we're going to bring in PK, which is like a more high EC product when we're mixing it within our nutrient feed. So like day 29 to 39, let's call it.
That's your bloom booster.
That's just one of our bloom boosters. We're using PK 1314 from Canna. We're still going to be reducing our base from like a 8 feed base to like a 6 to 4 mils per gallon on Canna. Like everybody's different in the way that they do with their feeds, but this is kind of how we do it anyways. Down to like a 6 to 4 mils per gallon, but we're again bringing in our PK now, and like our EC is kind of sticking the same around that 1.6 to 1.7 range. Once we get into the 40s, we're starting to come to more the conclusion of the cycle. So we're 63 days is typically our flowering cycle. When we're at like day 42, 43, we're going to start preparing for our flush. And I'll get into what I mean by flush. So at that point, our PK is gone. So our EC is down to like a 1.0 at that period. Once we're getting kind of closer to like day 48, like I'd say day 44 to 48, we're doing like 2 mils Calamag, 2 mils A and B, where our EC is coming in at like a 0.6 or so. So it's a very small amount. So just to kind of wrap it up, day 48, we're hitting with winter frost. So we do like a 1-day hit of winter frost to new mill at 10 mils a gallon. And then we go to straight RO water the rest of the way out, all the way to harvest, which gives us about 17-ish days of RO. When we're feeding at this point with just RO, I've fed my media so much EC, like my media has so much within it that I know that the plant can feed off of what I've given it. So am I flushing? It's like what most people's terms are, like flushing the plant out. No, that's not what I'm doing. I'm saving money by relying on what I've already put within the media. So I know I can feed straight water, watch the plant consume itself, and then kind of wrap it up at that.
And you're using recharge, so you've got microbes interactions that have stored up nutrients as well that are going to continue to deliver as you start tapering down through that water RO cycle. I do the very same thing. It's just not as quite scientifically, but kind of in theory, I do it.
It's not that mine's scientific. It's that I have this just down to my science, I guess. Like it's not science, but to my science, bro science or whatever. And it's important too that I'm running strains that all can handle this feed. Like my strain selection throughout my facility, not just on a day-to-day basis or on a room-to-room basis, but throughout the facility has to match what I'm doing, because I don't want to make any special changes for one strain of 7 within a room. I want to be able to make sure that everything can handle my system throughout the whole thing. And if it doesn't, it's likely going to be eliminated. Strawberry guava is a good example of that. It really likes to get fed a lot of EC, like in that day 30 to 40 range, where I'm not willing to just like give this one different feed and like cause one extra feed to be mixed up, where I could have ran a different strain that's going to perform relatively well within my strain ranking system and take it and absorb in kind of the same as everything else throughout the room.
Eh?
Like a little Canadian, or I don't know, Minnesota.
We had a Northern Michigan A's too. Like, come on, give us some credit here.
It's true.
I'm 45 minutes from Windsor. We're right here.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're coming up towards the end of our interview, so I'll give JR a chance to kind of think of our last few questions or so. One of them, just real quick, that we could throw out is just give people pro tips on how often they should test their water.
Once a season, or like summer, winter, something like that. It's hard to. This is a broad question because there's so many different climates throughout the United States, and this is not just like a Michigan audience. But for people like in a cold weather climate or like JR in a rainy season, like testing throughout those seasons. And if you're within a municipality that has like city water, all you got to do is, like I said earlier, look it up. It's no cost to you, and you can usually get water kits for pretty cheap, or if not free. Especially like Michigan, I know we had free water testing during the whole lead thing for like you go to Home Depot and get a small kit and ship it, and they'll give you everything that's in it.
Nice. Now, we've all as growers had our water horror stories. So go ahead and give the folks out there one of your doozies.
One of them?
Yeah.
Pulling up to the so this was like 2015 or so, and this was like no state licensing yet, let's just put it that way, and pulling up to the commercial spot that nobody knew was there with water coming out the garage door. Yeah, that was fun. So just like pulling up and seeing water pouring out was like, okay,
we got work to do.
Here we go. Put your boots on.
Our 10-hour day just turned into a 16-hour day.
Mine. That was back when I was just me. I was a 40 lighter. I ran all by myself. I did everything myself in that one. That one got me where I am today. But that one did turn into a longer day. Like having like bottom draw pumps or like Mondi pumps, things that can draw to a very low level. It was helpful. Yeah. Squeegees, like, cause that place didn't have any floor drains. So like everything was just, I walked in and my shoes were covered.
Oh man.
Dude, one time I was in a spot, we had a commercial spot, and I was trying to impress my grower that I could, or my guy was teaching me that I could run it myself, right? So I'm running things for like probably a week straight. Everything's going well. He invites all his buddies over. They're all smoking out in the room. I pop in the room. I start smoking, and of course I forgot to turn off the reservoir. And somebody says, "Hey, why is there water running through the wall?" And I opened the door, and the whole inside of the warehouse probably had at least 2 inches of water everywhere.
Fortunately, in this new building that I got, I have floor drains, and there's one like right by the feeder res because I left the fill res on. I've done it twice now at this new spot, and like I said, we have 1,200 gallons sitting there, so it's 1,200 gallons that goes on the floor. And like that's more than 1,200 gallons because the water is still producing too. Like it's still like running its normal system. So it's probably like 1,800 gallons of water that had been. Yeah, that was a waste. Those are not good days.
Water bill.
Water bill.
Yeah. Well, so MJ BizCon was just like a couple of weeks ago or whatever that was. What's your thoughts on it, takes on it?
So we touched on this a little bit pre-show. My biggest take, honestly, was that cultivation was held in such a small area compared to post-production. So like processing, packaging, dispensary stuff, all the post stuff was in a room that was like almost 1.5 size of the cultivation room. It was kind of cool how they did it. I don't hate how they did it because man, it is exhausting walking that show. First of all, there's so much to see. There's so much to go through. Like I think I typically put on like 9 miles a day just there.
Right.
Like there's just so much going, and then there's all that standing too. And we're not as young as we used to be, so our body doesn't feel as good as it does standing for 8 hours on end. But it was kind of cool how they separated it, and all the cultivation people were kind of in one side, like more like those types of like-minded people were in that side of the event or the show center. Versus like maybe more the suits or the people that are in it for not necessarily as right reasons were in the kind of their own area. It was kind of shocking to see the lack of emphasis on cultivation when cultivation is the driver of the industry. Like without us, without what we do, like there is no industry.
Yeah, but Matt, there's no money in cultivation.
No, there isn't. There really isn't, though. Honestly, like we're fortunate to be in a spot that we are, that we're producing product in quality with quality ranges that we are, because
I hear you, brother.
It's hard right now. It is hard for a lot of people. So
it is.
It was interesting. We talked a little bit earlier too about the AI and some of the cool stuff that's coming on with that, with like kind of checking crops from above, drone coverage and that type of stuff. But honestly, like my biggest takeaway from the entire trip was the sphere, and that thing was absolutely amazing. If you go to Vegas, or not a lot of people are Vegas people, like definitely go see that thing, because like there's parts where, well, I may or may not have been influenced by certain things, but I was holding on to the bottom of my seat thinking that I was going to fall over the rail, because the screen is just absolutely amazing. Just some of the capture footage is incredible.
That's cool. So cool, man. That's cool. So did you have any good meals while you're down there?
Always, yeah. Jaron, those guys were great to me. The Canna guys, Toby over there, like those guys were great to me. Those relationships and those people, that's kind of like what is my driving force behind these meetings, to see everybody again and touch elbows with everybody again and say hello. And, I think that's really my driver to these events at this point.
That's the part I miss the most. And I feel bad for a lot of these dudes that got to figure it out, because if you can't pack the walls in Vegas, how are you going to do it in Biloxi, Mississippi or somewhere? You know what I mean? It's so these trade shows, the glory of them, I think might be a thing of the past, and the new digital age is something that people out there are going to have to get used to branding themselves with. And so I think as a sales rep, that's just adding another element to the repertoire of all the things you need to be able to do. And I'm going to get a rep back on here soon so we can sit down and talk to somebody about folks, stuff like that.
Reps are like, they're very important positions throughout the industry. It's important to have somebody to turn to, especially with products that you believe in and you trust in. And, you become friends with these people too. Like they're people just like us, and they want to like be in this, involved in this, just the same way that we are. And like half of them are cultivators too. They just do it on a smaller scale because their schedule's a little bit busier. But it's a very thankless job with what they have to do at these shows. being that extroverted for some people is really hard. Like it's
Yeah.
hard for me. Like I'll use some influences to help me get through the shows, you know, to keep a smile on my face and keep me interacting with everybody. But it's a thankless job. It's in they're on their feet all day. They're partying too. So like they can go into the next day and put their game face on and be ready for a whole day of an event. So
well, we were talking to Jaron, and he said there's the morning shift where you have breakfast with everyone, and then you set up your booth and you run it all day, and then there's the dinner shift where you have to go do your dinner thing,
right?
And then it's party time, and so then you got to party with everyone till like 3 or 4 in the morning. Get up and do it again, and it's a 4-day gauntlet for those guys.
Yeah,
so
and like East Coast people,
you know?
and East Coast people, like 3 a.m. That's not 3 a.m. to us. Like that's way later. So it's definitely it's a fun show. Like if you get to any shows, like these shows are a lot of fun. You know, the organizers say what you will about them. You know, like the BizCon people, what but it's the kind of that necessary evil where it at least brings everybody together and you know it creates an environment for everybody to have a good time.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna head out, so let's let everyone know where they can follow you, where they can check out your company online, all that kind of stuff. Give us some shout outs.
So Michigan Matt is who I am. You can find me on Instagram. It's basically all I'm on any day anymore. I actually just got my main account back yesterday, so yay. Faded.mi on Instagram is the company account that is likely shadow banned because Instagram holds the gauntlet over us. But that being said, that's really the best places you can find us. Find me. Feel free to reach out anytime. I'm happy to speak with people.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing such detailed information. Really kind of walked people through several different things. Super interesting for folks of all skill levels, I think, that could take something away from today's show. So I really appreciate your time today, Matt. Thank you, everyone who's been watching, folks in our live chat like MacBuds. He's going to take home a hat and some seeds today. As a thanks for tuning into the show. And then also thanks to our sponsors, Lost Coast Plant Therapy. There you go. TikiSeeds.com, TikiCuts.com, Neptune Seedbank.com, and Sacred3Mushrooms.com. But Matt, thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your year. And I hope 2024 is an even better one.
Thank
you. You guys continue to grow too and keep doing your thing. Happy to come back anytime.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, man. We really appreciate having you, brother. It's nice to have you get your butt in the chair. I know you're a very busy man.
Makes it all worth it.
Well, JR, as always, growers love.